I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, two stories that could have serious consequences for Israel and the entire Middle East. One out of America, where President Trump has announced he will be withdrawing all 2,000 American troops currently serving in Syria. This decision has caused a firestorm of criticism of the president and caused the highly respected Defense Secretary, four-star General James Mattis, to resign his cabinet position. The overarching criticism of President Trump is that he virtually ignores the counsel and advice of all of his top military advisors, who in this instance believe it is a serious geopolitical mistake to create a military vacuum in Syria, which is most likely to be filled by Russia and Iran. There are also stories coming out of Israel suggesting that Israeli officials are extremely upset with the president's decision, the first time Israel seems to be at odds with the president who has been hailed as the best friend of Israel ever to sit in the White House, due to his recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and also a number of other diplomatic moves in the United Nations with respect to funding Palestinian terrorism and withdrawing the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal. It will be most interesting to see how the president's decision to withdraw all American troops from Syria will adversely affect Israel's relationship with Mr. Trump. Then at the same time, the Israeli government is facing its own political crisis as the Netanyahu coalition government collapsed on Monday, resulting in a call for early elections this coming April. The coalition fell apart when the Orthodox parties, which provide Mr. Netanyahu with a narrow one-person majority in the Knesset, pulled out of the coalition when the government supported a law that would make ultra-Orthodox Jews subject to service in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, ever since David Ben-Gurion made a bargain with the ultra-Orthodox, first in 1947, again in 1953, giving the chief rabbinate total control over marriage, divorce, conversion, and in general halachic issues relating to Jewish life. And the bargain also acknowledged that Orthodox Jews studying Torah full-time in yeshivot in Israel were making an important contribution to the Jewish state and to the Jewish people, and were therefore exempt from service in the IDF. Now, the number of yeshiva students in 1947 and in 1953, the number was relatively small, so Ben-Gurion's deal did not really bother Israelis. But today, when the number of ultra-Orthodox Jews studying in yeshivot has grown exponentially, many Israelis feel it is only fitting for yeshiva students to serve in the IDF alongside the rest of the Israeli population, and they resent the fact that yeshiva students do not serve. And so the Netanyahu government supported the bill that would impose military service on ultra-Orthodox students, and in response, the ultra-Orthodox parties withdrew from the coalition and the government fell. The big political question now in Israel is, can Benjamin Netanyahu win a fifth term in a national election? A question made all the more complicated by serious accusations against the prime minister, dealing with his facing indictment and conviction for taking bribes in a scandal dealing with Israel's most powerful cell phone company, Bezek. Well, how do Israelis view these two sensitive issues, which essentially deal with two heads of state, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu? For some insight and analysis, I am so pleased to have on our JBS phones from Israel the outstanding political correspondent for the Times of Israel, Haviv Rettig Gur. Haviv, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Haviv, let's take these issues one by one, starting with President Trump's announcement he's withdrawing American troops from Syria. Are the reports that Israel is extremely upset with this president's decision accurate?
I think so. There's no question that Israelis, I think Israel's great strategic need right now in the Syrian conflict is to prevent Iranian entrenchment, to prevent Iranian smuggling of weapons, especially precision rockets, to Hezbollah in South Lebanon, which has an arsenal of upwards of 100,000 rockets whose sole purpose is to attack Israel someday with those rockets. The U.S. forces and the backing they gave to Kurdish forces on the ground in Syria were a very significant part of the ability of Western intelligence, of Israel, and to really operate in Syria and to prevent the passage of weapons and to do these things that for Israel are an important security measure. And what the American withdrawal did went beyond just pulling out, 2,000-odd U.S. troops. In fact, the United States has essentially withdrawn all its military support for the Kurds,
yes,
the Kurdish militias that had been pro-America, that had depended on America, and that are now at the complete and utter mercy of the Turks. The Turkish army is not famous for, its respect of human rights when it comes to Kurdish militias and Kurdish populations. So there's 2 points. There are two, I would say, ways in which Israelis view this withdrawal really as a kind of betrayal. One got a lot of media, but I think is actually the less significant one. The idea that America pulled out and now America is no longer part of the fight for the future of Syria, which is vital to Israel's security, to regional stability, et cetera, to containing Iran. It seems to fly in the face of Trump's claim that he's working very hard to contain Iran because Syria is a linchpin in Iran's regional ambitions. And Israel would like America to be there. But it's important not to overstate how bad that problem is. The chief of staff of the Israeli army, Gadi Eisenkot, said a couple of days ago, listen, we've been dealing with Syria and with Iran in Syria and with all kinds of enemies. Hamas has been hosted in Syria for many, many years. We've been dealing with Syria as an enemy state for decades. The fact that the Americans won't be there, just like they used to not be there, is not this dramatic setback for Israeli security. So Israelis feel, I think, betrayed, but there's something much, much deeper than that kind of sort of tactical, but we'll call it, a tactical withdrawal by America that surprised everyone. But there's a deeper betrayal, and that's not the betrayal of Israel. That's the betrayal of the Kurds. And this matters to Israel because in the end, anybody who comes to Israel with demands on the peace process, demands for withdrawal, demands for moderation when it comes to, South Lebanon's arsenals of rockets, demands over Gaza. Anyone who comes to Israel with demands has to be able to tell Israel the international community is a real thing. It exists. If you are endangered by these moderate steps, by these withdrawals, the world will be on your side. There's such a thing as an international community that will come to your defense. Israel is watching the Kurds get thrown to the dogs.
Yes.
By an America that doesn't need to do this. And so it weakens America much more deeply in Israel because of what it's doing to the Kurds, not because of what it's doing to Israel.
Yes. It is hard for me to believe that President Trump would have made this decision without discussing it at all with Mr. Netanyahu and the Israeli government. What's your understanding? Was Mr. Netanyahu and the Knesset totally blindsided? Or do you think that even if it was a decision they disapproved of, there was back and forth between Trump and Netanyahu?
It was never made clear. Netanyahu said something along the lines of he was notified, which is to say he knew before the announcement. But it looks like other than notifying, there wasn't a debate. There wasn't a discussion. There wasn't a dear Israel, we want to pull out. Let's talk about a time frame. Let's talk about what you need to make this, not be dramatic and sudden and surprising and maybe hurt you strategically. it looks like this was something that, frankly, not just Israel was surprised. It looks like the United States military was surprised.
Yes. All right.
And that, again, calls into question, the reliability of America, which is a strategic question for Israel.
I understand. President Trump has had a love affair with Israel, which is naming a Jerusalem train station after him. What do you think this decision by President Trump is going to do to the Trump-Israeli relationship on two levels, Haviv? On one level, in terms of high level of government between Trump and Netanyahu and whoever is the next prime minister, and also how does it affect the way the Israeli people view a president whom they have lauded up till now?
That's a great question. I am a pessimist on the Israel-Trump relationship, and I have been from the start. So just to put my cards out there, I don't think Israelis admire Trump. I don't think Israelis think Trump is. They see the news. They see Trump's troubles. They see how much of those troubles are self-inflicted, many times. And I think they believe that he's a little bit of a little bit of a clown and a little bit of someone who is impulsive, which is not a great thing to be over, as a strategist, as a president of the world's great superpower. They also think he's on their side. In other words, his instincts are with them. He sees the world. He sees bad guys as bad guys. Terrorists are bad guys that don't need too much understanding, and he backs them in some fundamental ways. So they support him, but they don't deeply trust him. And in that sense, I think this kind of Syria withdrawal fits Israeli expectations about who Trump is. I don't think Israelis are. I think they were surprised that the order was delivered and that America is doing this, but they're not surprised that the Trump administration is capable of pulling this kind of a surprise, if that makes sense. And I think, look, the admiration is still there. The train station naming is something that the transportation minister wants to do. It has not happened yet. There's a lot of resistance in Israel to doing it. There's a little bit of a fear that, Trump won't be president forever, and then the world, the Democrats come in, and Israel was under Netanyahu, was so closely identified with Trump, it could hurt us. So there's a little bit of resistance there. But the general, I don't think there was that kind of any kind of dramatic shift in terms of Israelis' respect for Trump or liking of Trump because of this move.
I can't tell, though. Are you saying that, in essence, while they appreciated the things he did, they already didn't like him or didn't trust him, and for some reason there was this balance? On the one hand, he's doing lovely things for Israel. At the same time, the Israeli public had suspicions of the president's ability to lead the strongest nation on the planet.
Let me try and use an analogy. Imagine an uncle that you love, that loves you, that you have no doubt loves you, that buys you the gifts when they visit and that talks to you and asks you and is concerned about your life, but also has a propensity to lose all the money they've ever invested. There's a difference between liking the person and trusting them with your pension.
I understand.
So I think Israelis sense that Trump is on their side instinctively. Some Israelis are uncomfortable about that because they believe that it comes from essentially Islamophobia or racism on Trump's part. Some Israelis are uncomfortable with it for a different reason, which is tactical, which is when the Democrats come in, we don't want to be so identified with Trump. So there's a little bit of tension there, but there's a basic sense among most Israeli Jews that Trump likes us and supports us. We're a small country. It's not a small thing that the President of the United States likes you. You don't turn it down. But at the same time, he's not seen as a competent and reliable and consistent strategist that you can rely on for your national security.
I understand.
So those two things coexist.
Okay. The reality is, by the way, it's not simply that Trump loves, in an emotional sense, Israel. When you see some of the things that Donald Trump has done in the United Nations with Human Rights Council, when you see his withdrawing funds from the Palestinian Authority, when you see him moving the embassy and recognizing Jerusalem when president after president promised to do it and nobody did, and when he seemed to take, for a moment at least, a strong stand. I shouldn't say that. He has taken a strong stand against Iran in general. All these are the things which seem to make Israelis very happy with Donald Trump, and none of them are less true today. At the same time, this action seems to undermine, you've already described how, Israeli security and the way in which Israel is going to relate, certainly to the Kurds, but it may, in fact, bring Russia and Iran into Syria, and most people believe that cannot be good for Israel.
I'm glad you said that. And also, I want, because of what you said, I also want to clarify. Trump's actions on Iran, for example, for most Israeli strategists, left-wing and right-wing together, are existential. They're strategic. They're vital. Trump is already, in Israelis' view, on big strategic questions that really matter, delivered for Israel in a huge and vital way that could deeply affect Israeli security over the next 40 years.
Yes.
So I didn't mean to suggest that he's personal. Look, he's personally a little bit clownish. I mean, he says so himself. I didn't mean to suggest that Israelis completely write him off as a leader. He has done a tremendous number of things for Israel that Israelis think really matter.
Yes.
At the same time, when the chips are down, at the end of the day, don't trust foreigners to defend you. Anyone, right?
Yes.
That's essential Israeli sort of thing, and
Yes.
that has been reinforced by this withdrawal from Syria.
Okay. All right. We'll have to see what happens. By the way, you didn't tell me whether you think that this has created a rift between Netanyahu and Trump. What do you think?
No, I don't think it has. Netanyahu views his relationship with Trump as one of the most important strategic decisions he's made in the last 2 years. He's sticking with it. It's vital. He's disappointed in this decision, but he's so thrilled about the other 6 decisions that Trump has made on Israel in the last 2 years that I don't think he'll allow any distance to come out of this.
Okay. So let's talk for a moment about Benjamin Netanyahu and his political fortunes. Now that his coalition government has fallen, how's he viewed, in your estimation, by the Israeli electorate, the Israeli people? And how much are Israelis turned off by the charges leveled against him?
Luckily, we have very good polling on this, so I don't have to guess. Benjamin Netanyahu is an interesting character in the Israeli electorate's mind. On the one hand, he is not well liked, even inside Likud. Personally, he is considered a hedonist. He had the corruption investigations into his dealings revealed to Israelis all kinds of very unflattering things about using. He's a very wealthy man. He's personally a wealthy man. And he charges, meals, gourmet meals to the taxpayer, and all kinds of, in very significant amounts. And he takes gifts from billionaires when he's already prime minister, of luxurious cigars and champagne bottles that he can already afford, but he still decides to receive them as gifts over many years consistently from billionaires, even though he's already a wealthy man and he's already a serving prime minister. There's all of this strange. None of the corruption allegations against him are sort of are dramatic corruption. It's all very petty corruption, and I think that has deeply hurt his legacy. He's seen as a man who's personally very flawed. At the same time, Israelis trust him on the one issue that matters to them most, and that's security. Mm-hmm. And he has sold that issue, and I think for the vast majority of Israelis, even left-wing voters, he has delivered on the promise that he will, be a security-minded prime minister. So all expectations right now are that he wins the next election. He called the election at a pretty clever timing. If he'd waited until he has to go to election in May, then there would have been a 6-month campaign until election day in November of 2019. But because he called early elections, under law, the campaign is not 6 months long, but actually 3 months long. when you're the incumbent leading in the polls, the shorter the campaign, the better. So he actually went to early elections because he just stands a better chance of winning them. All the polls show him winning fairly easily, probably more easily than in the last election in 2015.
Oh, I find that so fascinating, Haviv. And, you know, I understand that Israelis admire or, you know, as you've said, they often vote for Netanyahu, we understand, because he's seen to be strong on defense. It's interesting to me that Avigdor Lieberman, who was the defense minister, resigned from his position and therefore took away one vote in the Knesset, making the coalition only have 61 out of the 120-seat Knesset. And that Lieberman resigns because he felt that Netanyahu did not go far enough and was not ready to, quote, go to war against Hamas. And this Hamas, I don't know, uprisings that happen over and over again and result in ultimately Israeli kids having to, in one way or another, fight Hamas. The sense is the Israeli people are weary of this. And yet at the same time, Mr. Netanyahu retains this reputation and image of being very strong on defense. And as you just said, if there's any reason that he will win an unprecedented fifth term, the fourth was already unprecedented, it's because of his stand on security. But speak to this apparent paradox, Haviv.
Yeah. Netanyahu, this is, by the way, his history throughout his career. He's always, when he was prime minister in the 90s, he carried out every commitment Israel made in the Oslo process to the letter. He was actually the last prime minister to sign a deal with the Palestinians in 1998 at Y River. He has fought 4 wars, or I believe 3 of the last 4 wars in Gaza were under Netanyahu, and he has always been the voice in the Security Cabinet urging de-escalation, withdrawal, ending ceasefires. He is on security very, very, I don't know what to call it exactly, but I think he would say careful. And he is seen by Israelis as a very serious and thoughtful guy on the big security question. Mm-hmm. Basically, there are 2 camps in the Israeli political elite. 2 camps among the strategic planners, among the former prime ministers, among the top-level cabinet ministers, among the generals. And the 2 camps roughly correspond to right and left. The left argues that the most important strategic problem facing Israel today is the Palestinian problem. And we have to solve this problem because of demographics and because of, the imbalance of people who can't vote in Israel but are under Israeli rule. And all of these issues, they're not moral issues, they're strategic issues. We have to end the occupation. We have to make peace with the Palestinians. All the other security challenges we face, like Iran, Iran is this huge question, this huge problem, but ultimately we have the tools to deal with Iran. We have the tools to deal with Hezbollah. The Palestinian threat is the threat that we will lose the Jewish state because we will have to give citizenship to the Palestinians in the West Bank, etc. That Palestinian question is the most important issue. And then there's the right-wing camp of generals and former, and senior officials that says the Palestinian question is actually delayable. Time is on our side. We can push this off for another 20 years. The big, grand strategic threat is Iran, is jihadism. Sunni jihadism is terrible, Islamic State, Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, etc., but it is contained at the moment. Shiite jihadism, represented by Iran, that we see in Syria, that we see in Hezbollah, is not contained, and it's on the warpath throughout the Middle East, and it's seeking a nuclear weapon, and it has the power to be an existential threat against us in a way that the Palestinians are not and can never be. Mm-hmm. And those are the 2 camps. Benjamin Netanyahu belongs to the right in that divide. He believes that Iran is a big threat, and the Palestinians are not a big threat. Mm-hmm. And ironically, what that means when it comes to Gaza is that he views Gaza, which sends rockets on Israeli civilians and which has this, constant tug of war and never gives us any peace. But he actually views it as a sideshow and a distraction that can never be allowed to pull our attention away from the existential threat, which is Hezbollah, Syria, Iran.
Very interesting. Very interesting. By the way, it's the best explanation I've heard. I appreciate it very much, Haviv. We only have a moment or two left. If Netanyahu wins again, and there's evidence that he's going to, why is there any reason to assume he'll be able to build a more stable coalition government than the one that just fell? And which party or parties will replace the Orthodox parties in a future Netanyahu coalition government? You only have about a minute or so to answer.
This coalition lasted 4 years. This was a very stable coalition. Netanyahu got everything he wanted from them on security, defense, foreign affairs, the issues that he cares about. He ran policy completely, and he sold to the various coalition partners things like education, religion, social work, other issues, the welfare state, things like that, the economy. And if he gets what he has now, again, I think he would be thrilled and delighted. Israeli governments always fall ahead of time because Israeli coalition parties, as they come up to the end of their terms, become automatically, because they have to run against each other for the same electoral base, become opponents, become election competitors. So very few Israeli governments survive their entire 4-year term. It's just not built into the system. But this was a stable, long-lasting, serious coalition that produced real policy, and I think he expects the next one to be relatively the same. He hopes.
Will it include? Will it include ultra-Orthodox parties again?
Yes. The entire ultra-Orthodox crisis over the draft bill is manufactured. Everybody wanted to go to elections anyway, including Netanyahu. It was good timing for them. They can't go to elections in the summer because government is off in August and people are off and traveling. They have to go to elections in the spring. This allows them to go to elections in the spring. And so they were going to elections anyway. They just needed the excuse. The ultra-Orthodox have already agreed in every sense except actual votes to the current state of the draft bill agreement. It's probably going to pass in the first 6 to 8 to 12 months of the next coalition agreement, of the next government, with slight modifications, and I think Netanyahu has a stable coalition going forward after Election Day. Of course, in the end, the voter decides, so I say that very tentatively, but that's what the polls show today.
Haviv, you are fabulous. Every time I speak to you, I tell you the same thing. It is just a joy for me to be able to bring your voice and your perspective and your wisdom to the JBS audience throughout America. I can't thank you enough for always finding time for me and JBS. I wish you a wonderful, close to this calendar year, and I hope that in 2019 you and I at least have opportunity to speak to each other often, if not to see each other every now and then. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure for me. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Be well.
Happy New Year.
You too. Haviv Rettig Gur, the outstanding political correspondent for the Times of Israel, who gives us a perspective we normally don't ever see or hear in, the general American media or even the Anglo-Jewish media. My thanks as always to our director, great job today, Sloan Copeland, Associate Director Dara Golub, Editor John McDevitt, and to the producer of this edition of In the News, Tisha Bader, filling in for Carol Lilienthal, who is on vacation. And if you're watching us on Wednesday night or Thursday morning or Thursday afternoon, please make a note to watch our first ever JBS Telethon in celebration of JBS's 7th anniversary, Thursday evening from 7 to 11 p.m. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.